President Emmanuel Macron and his wife Brigitte Macron. Of course, alongside President Xi is his wife Pengli Yuan. And they are standing in front of one of Paris's most historical landmarks, built in 1806 and again touched up in 1836. The structure really has undergone several modifications throughout the years, remains the true essence of Paris as a symbol of power and unity. Of course, this is the third leg of President Xi's ongoing European tour, which began in the Italian capital of Rome on Thursday. And then he concluded a state visit to Monaco before heading right here to Paris. And here we have the two presidents, French President Emmanuel Macron, alongside Chinese President Xi Jinping, right there at the red carpet, rolled out for the Chinese president here as he begins his official state visit to the country of France in the heart of the capital there of Paris. Arc de Triomphe is just such a monumental landmark there in the city. These two countries celebrating 55 years of diplomatic ties. And we do want to bring in our studio guest, Professor Zheng Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. And Professor, 55 years of diplomatic ties, that's certainly a long time. What makes this relationship between these two countries so special?
Well, France is always very special to China. It's actually the first country, Western country, to establish diplomatic relations with China. And also, if you look at the history of the ruling party here in China, a lot of it is related to, it can be traced back to the students study and working there in Paris about 100 years ago. Right now, actually, there's a ceremony of the 100-year anniversary of the students, the first wave of Communist Party leaders studying in France. And we have a term here in China. In France, it's called the Mouvement de Travail Études. That's the movement of work and study. So these people, former Premier Mr. Zhou Enlai, Deng Xiaoping, they all studied in Paris in those days. So this relationship went back many, many years. And you know, this country has a special role in the foundation of our own country here in China, People's Republic of China. It all can be traced back to 100 years ago. These people studied in France. And you know, we have a legend that President Deng Xiaoping really loved croissant. And during the first trip back to the United Nations in the 1970s, I believe, he asked people to buy croissant for him. So he remembered these days, we spent these days in Paris.
I'm very impressed by your French pronunciation, by the way, Professor.
Thank you. Just a but.
So it's important just to let folks know who are just tuning in again. We are seeing Chinese President Xi Jinping alongside French President Emmanuel Macron just in front of the Arc de Triomphe, famous landmark there in Paris, as President Xi begins his official visit to this country that has seen 55 years of diplomatic ties between China and France. Beautiful day there, a bit windy. You can see the flags blowing in the breeze there. Very large French flag that we are seeing for sure. This is the honor guard paying respects to President Xi on his official state visit. Yes. Absolutely, and it's important to note too, in terms of geography here of the city, this is about 2 kilometers away from the Elysee Palace, where these two leaders are going to be meeting.
I think it's northwest of center of Paris, right down to Champs-Élysées.
Champs-Élysées, the famous avenue, yes, absolutely. And no doubt this city itself has seen a little bit of some ups and downs most recently over wow, probably about 18 weeks or so. We've been seeing protests, anti-government protests against French President Emmanuel Macron, but clearly today is all about this official state visit from the Chinese president here. The two presidents standing side by side certainly want to collaborate on a lot of things. What do you think, Professor, those main things in terms of cooperation, collaboration between these two countries that these leaders are going to focus on for this visit?
I think at the very least, China and France are on the same page on battling the climate problem.
Of course.
President Macron's famous statement that "make the planet great again" resonates very well with President Xi's vision of building a common destiny for mankind. So, as a matter of fact, in President Xi's published article, he mentioned that there is similarity between these two statements. Aside from the climate side, I also think that both countries can work together on defending the world governance system, the multilateralism, against protectionism, and also certainly in area of economic cooperation. There's a great future between the two countries, and I think. President Macron also mentioned that he would like to work with China on the Belt and Road Initiative, although we haven't really signed the memorandum of understanding yet. Hopefully they will during this trip.
And that will be interesting how the French president reacts to Italy signing on to the Belt and Road Initiative, and certainly maybe something that the two of them will talk about. But I have seen in some of the French papers, the French media has talked about there being some sort of a two-way Silk Road. The West likes to call it the new Silk Road, right? And they talk about a two-way Silk Road, which I think is an interesting way of putting it.
Yes, I think from French perspective, they want to see this major infrastructure initiative spreading out in parts of Europe in cooperation with the vision in Brussels. Which is very much, the European Union is very much led by the French and as well as Germany. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that, of course, French companies will also like to participate in those infrastructure build-up plans, especially in Africa, where France used to have a very, very large influence. They still have a very large influence.
And you were mentioning Germany as well as the EU, and it just so happens on Tuesday, you've got German Chancellor Angela Merkel and European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker will actually be joining President Macron and President Xi in a meeting to explore, quote, points of convergence ahead of that EU-China summit in Brussels, which is it's just another interesting way of putting it. Points of convergence. Yeah, I like this.
If you look at the statements from Merkel, from Merkel and from Macron, it's a little bit different. I think a little bit different. It's quite subtle difference there. But that's what they're talking about, convergence.
Yes.
I think overall the European side view China as a force of competition, as a rising power, but also sees opportunities as well for cooperation. So it's both sides of the coin, and hopefully the relationship can further develop for the interest of both sides.
Absolutely, and this is what we know. We know the EU bloc has at some points labeled China a bit of a rival when it does come to trade.
Competitor, I think.
I think, okay, we could say that. But despite being Europe's second largest trading partner next to the US, however, we do know that the European Union is the first largest trading partner
Absolutely.
To China. So again, if you're just joining us here, we are watching live out of Paris here. This is the grand welcoming ceremony for Chinese President Xi Jinping as he begins his official state visit to the country. You can see him shaking hands with military officials, other politicians from France there, and to his left you've got French President Emmanuel Macron there. And these two leaders will eventually end up at the Elysee Palace, where they are scheduled to have a meeting. They're going to be, both countries here, signing a lot of documents, a lot of agreements. We're hearing about areas like nuclear energy, aerospace projects.
These are the two areas being very successful. Just imagine, just look at how many A320, A321 airplanes flying in the sky in China. Airbus has a major presence here in China. We buy a lot of airplanes, especially against the backdrop of this Boeing Max catastrophe here.
Yes, no doubt. And so we were just seeing sort of the end there of the welcoming ceremony. Again, the Arc de Triomphe is about 2 kilometers away from the palace there. So we'll certainly be seeing those two leaders shortly coming up here. But so we've got Professor Zhang Gong, our guest here in the studio from the University of International Business and Economics. So thank you again for staying with us here. Let's talk about what a China-France relationship actually means to the whole world.
I think this is very important. I think France is an anchoring force in the European Union. If China and France have a good relationship, working relationship, it means that the China-European Union will have a very stable relationship, and that's a huge stabilizing force for the world politics. I think, especially, there are forces on the other side of the Pacific that is very unilateral in nature, that is sort of a protectionist in nature. I think this is a balancing power, and certainly there are many areas in the United Nations, at WTO, and other international organizations where China and France be on the same page.
You know, one of the things we were just touching on was the Belt and Road Initiative, and Italy signing up for that. Huge news, right?
That's right.
The whole world was watching for that. Now, we have heard that President Macron has expressed interest, you were mentioning this, in the Belt and Road, but needed to better understand it, he said. A year later, has Macron come to a point where he understands it? What do you think his concerns might be?
I think his major concern is the implication for Europe. And second is, I think his concern is for the French companies' relationship with the Belt and Road Initiative, and what opportunities do these companies have in Africa, for example, in other parts of the world where these activities are taking place. And also, I think he probably may be interested in understanding better about this so-called debt trap thing. Which is, in my opinion, totally ridiculous. But there are quite a few politicians in the West who are talking about this. So I think he's also probably concerned a little bit about that as well. And also, I think we can't discuss this without the context of his French-U.S. relationship. He has to make these decisions. In consideration of the Paris-Washington relationship, and that's a major factor. As we all know,
it's all geopolitics in the end, right? Everybody working with everybody and thinking about how everyone else could react.
The official stance from the White House regarding Belt and Road Initiative hasn't been very good. I mean, you know the speech by Vice President Pence, he's saying this is a one-way road, this is a constricted belt. French attitude towards Belt and Road Initiative inevitably has to take into consideration of its biggest airline, I guess, right? So it's a complicated. It's also a very sophisticated decision, I think, from Paris' perspective.
All right, much more to talk about in terms of politics and policies between these two countries. Professor Zhang Gong going to stay with us here in the studio. But as we know, President Xi Jinping is now on his way to the Elysee Palace, where he will meet with French President Emmanuel Macron. The historic home has been the official residence of French presidents since the end of the 19th century. And we at CGTN will be following the visit closely, so do stay tuned for the latest. All right, prior to